I need a desk. For the past couple of years since moving into this new house, I've been working from the dining table, and I want to replace that dining table with a new one, so stay tuned for that. That will be an upcoming video. But before I can do that, I have to move my computer and computer monitors and everything else off of that dining table. So I'm building myself a desk out of white oak. What you see me doing here is just skip planing these 8/4 white oak boards, sending them through the planer just to take a shaving off the top and get a better look at the grain and the color of these boards and figure out how I want to orient them, which pieces I want to use for the top and which ones for the legs. And it's at this point that I realized these are 5 very different boards. Don't have a lot of continuity when it comes to grain, patterns, or color, but it is what it is, and I'm going to make the best of it. So next step is cut them down to rough length, and then I can set about properly milling them to get them flat and square. Now, I only have a small benchtop joiner, which works fine when it's a board that's 2 or 3 feet long max, but anything longer than that and it's fairly useless. So I built this sled and put these tracks in it where I can slide these little hardwood wedges underneath to support the longer boards like these, which are about 5 feet long. And these keep the board from rocking, keep it steady and stable as I pass it through the planer. And by doing this, I can actually get a really good result, a nice flat face, which you'll see here momentarily. And after a few passes through, you can see, voila, we have a flat face from which to work. Next step is to try to establish a nice straight edge, so I use my track saw for that. And then once I have this one straight edge, I can pass it through the table saw and rip it to its final width. I wish I could tell you that after ripping an edge with the track saw and then passing it through the table saw, I had edges on these boards that were absolutely perfect and the seams came together flawlessly, and that's unfortunately simply not the case. So to really get these edges dialed in so that I have nice joints on these boards, I have to do a bit of hand work here. So time to put the board in the vise and get out the old number 7. I enjoy this process, to be honest. It's meditative, and I really do like the results, the end results that I get. One of the most satisfying things when you have a nice, sharp, tuned, highly tuned hand plane, and you just get these perfect shavings like this. And then afterwards you can see, now those joints really do come together nicely and all but disappear. No domino was used in the making of this video. Doing it the old-fashioned way with the dowel jig. Mostly just using the dowels here to help a little bit with alignment since these are longer boards. For shorter glue-ups, I don't typically use them. I don't use anything. The wood glue is more than enough. But I do like it on these longer boards to help a little bit more dial the alignment in. So, dowels it is. They are a little bit pricey, but I must admit I like these Rockler panel clamps. For these large glue-ups like this, large panel glue-ups, they really do help keep things pretty flat, pretty aligned. Like I said, they're a bit pricey, but in the end, it's a lot less work afterwards trying to flatten these large glue-ups. So I think they're worth it. But with that said, as good a job as they do, there's still always a little bit of fine-tuning to really get things flat. So, back with the old number 7. I did have this one little knot hole right in the middle, which initially I was planning on this being the underside of the desk, but in the end I wound up using this for the top and flipping it over, so I'm glad I spent the time to fill it anyway. Just a little bit of tinted epoxy. You've seen it a million times, I'm sure. And now cutting the top and the legs to their final length using the track saw. And I've got this square that works with the Makita. It also works with Best Tool that's made by TSO. This thing is absolutely huge. I also burned the end of the wood there because I have a very dull blade on my track saw that I need to replace, but no big deal. It ends up getting planed off in the end. So I haven't talked about the design of this desk, but what I'm doing with this one is these mitered dovetail joints. So here I'm laying out for the tails. These are the 2 leg sections that I have clamped together. So I'm laying out the tails on the legs right now, marking them out using the dividers, and I'm going to cut them both simultaneously. I've cut some dovetails by hand. Wouldn't say a lot. I've cut some dovetails always by hand but it's always been on smaller parts like drawers, where you're dealing with something that's half an inch or maybe 5/8 of an inch in thickness and maybe only 4 or 5 inches wide. Doing that by hand on these 1.5 inch, they're actually more like 1 5/8 thick pieces of solid white oak that are more around 30 inches across, sounded like pure misery and torture, and would take, I don't even know, I want to know how many weeks it would have taken me. So I'm going to use as much as I can. I'm going to use power tools. I still have to do a lot of refining with chisels and hand tools on these joints, but I'm going to use power tools to cut the bulk of these dovetails. So still here, just marking out the tails now on these leg sections. So now I've got the 2 leg sections still clamped together. I made this little sled that I could take over to the table saw. And the table saw blade, I tilted at an angle. I forget the exact angle. It was 9-point-something degrees, whatever it turned out to be. And the nice thing about doing this anyway is obviously I've got very consistent cuts. As long as I line up the boards correctly, the cut's going to be dead on, and it'll be the same on every single one of these. So I go down the line cutting one side and then flip the boards around and cut the other side of the tail. So I've got a really consistent angle by doing it this way. Now, after doing all the angled cuts, I set my blade back to 90 degrees and cut the edges where the miters will go I also ran right down the middle of each one of those sections that'll get chiseled out here, just to give myself a little less work to do with the chisels later. We cut a vertical cut in between every one here in the waist section, so you'll see that in a moment when I start chiseling. The footage here of me chiseling out the waist is reduced down to, I don't know, a few seconds, but in reality, this was several days of chiseling all these tails out, and then of course on the corresponding pins, I had to do a lot of chisel work to refine those as well, which you'll see me work on the pins here in a moment. But I gotta admit, by the end of all of the chisel work that I did on this one, my hands were pretty beat up. I was thankful to have a work trip that took me on the road for about a week straight and allowed my hands to heal up, because there was all sorts of tiny little nicks and cuts and scratches on my hands from this. But it was fun nonetheless. Now this was tricky. To try to mark out the pins on the tabletop, on the desktop, it was kind of tricky to get this thing clamped up. You know, normally when you're doing dovetails on a small drawer pieces, it's pretty easy to just throw them in your vise on your workbench and use a hand plane to rest the other piece on top of and line them up. Very easy. In this case, that 1 5/8" white oak solid desktop is big and heavy and awkward to move around. The legs are tall, so trying to get this lined up in the vices and everything took me quite a while, but I finally managed to and was able to get some knife lines in there and mark out where the pins go. Then I just drilled some holes so that I had access holes for the jigsaw blade, and I just used the jigsaw to cut out the bulk of the waist. I used a handsaw here as well, just to cut off as much of the pin as I could without getting too close to that line. And then I'm going to use a little jig and a router to really dial in and cut right to the line on this. And I found this trick actually, and in fact I should give credit to Ishitani Furniture for the design of this desk as well. That's what I took my inspiration from. I saw him build this mitered dovetail desk as well, and I really love the design. I love the simplicity of it. I also love the idea of pushing myself a little bit and challenging myself to make these mitered dovetails. So all props to Ishitani for the inspiration for this. I made a couple little design tweaks myself, but I saw him using the same trick, using the angled piece there that you can run with a flush trim router bit, run that alongside that angled piece and really sneak up. I just kind of sneak up on the tail there on my knife lines and really try to get it as perfect as I could. I'm really just looking to get the upper, say, 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch of each one of these pins really dialed in, and then I can take these the jig off of there and then just use the flush trim bit to cut the rest of the pin and get it really perfect. See, I've got basically just the upper 1/4 of an inch or so of each one of these pins cut right to the line, to my knife lines. And now I can just use a flush trim router bit, and dial in the rest of that cut and get it, as far as the depth, get it all the way down to my knife line as well. Props to Tamar and Jonathan Katz-Moses for this router jig. It really worked perfectly in this application. You can see it just rests on the tops of those pins, and I can get it an absolutely perfect cut. And here's the finished product after I routed all those out. I was really happy with how this came out, and it was in some ways easier than I thought. The harder part was coming up here, cutting these miters and getting those perfectly dialed in was a little bit tougher. Definitely required a lot of chisel work. Now my dovetail saw here is not quite long enough to go the full length of this cut, the full depth of this cut, but I still like to start it. I like starting out the cut with this dovetail saw because I just feel like I have more control than I do with the Japanese pull saw, but you'll see I have to finish the cut with the Japanese pull saw to get it all the way down. Then I just have this 45-degree guide that I can use to help guide the chisels and really refine these miters now with the hand tools. So this was just my first test fitting of this side anyway of the desk, of these miters. Just putting them together, and I'm trying to make sure that those mitered corners really came together. On this one I had a little bit, I think, excess material. I didn't quite chisel it back perfectly to the knife line, so used a square here to make sure my blade was exactly 45 degrees and just cut right in between the two boards and helped really close that miter up. Now I'm also going to put a stretcher on this, and I'm going to use through wedge tenons. So what you see me doing here is marking out where the tenons are going to go on this board here, which will be the stretcher. And just cutting the lines out here for the tenons and using the coping saw. And in just a moment, you're going to see this cheap coping saw. I need to get a new one and a better one, but the blade keeps snapping on this one. Eventually, I ended up making the cut though, but At some point, I got to get a better coping saw. Remember what I was saying earlier about all the chisel work that I had to do and how much it beat up my hands. You can see the band-aids I've got all over my hands there from the little nicks and cuts. Now I'm just cutting the vertical slots that the wedges will eventually go into on these tenons. And more chisel work on these legs to cut out the mortises where the stretcher will go into. First using a Forstner bit just to cut the majority, but still had to do quite a bit of chiseling to get those mortises just right, honed in. And here I'm just drilling at the bottom of those slots where the wedges will go into these tenons. Just drilling a hole there to allow the wood to expand without it cracking. Just to make things a little less stressful, I decided to just glue up one side at a time. So here I'm just putting the glue all over the pins, and I'll get one side on and then do the whole process again on the other leg. Now you can see here as I keep cranking down on these pipe clamps, slowly but surely this joint comes together. Finally. And rinse and repeat on the other side. And once I had everything in clamps, the moment of truth where I checked for square and was thrilled to see it was perfect. Didn't even have to really adjust anything. Sometimes you get lucky. And the next morning, came down with my coffee and took everything out of clamps and had the really fun task of getting to lift and move this desk off of my workbench by myself. This thing is quite heavy, as you can imagine. That was not fun, but I managed. After cleaning up the dovetails with hand plane and cleaning up the miters as well, this thing was pretty much done, and now it was time to set about on the next part of this build, which is a cabinet and drawers. So I spared you the whole process of me milling the boards down for the cabinet and gluing them up, and fast forward to head to where I took them out of the clamps, cleaned up the glue a little bit, and cut the sections now for the sides and the top. I'm going to do a mitered joint on this box for these drawers, and I, for whatever reason, decided to do a waterfall grain wrap, continuous grain sort of thing on this box. I'm not really sure why, because you can't really see it. Once the cabinet sits under the desk, no one's ever really going to see it, but I don't know. Sometimes, as woodworkers, I guess, we know it's there, so we subject ourselves to these sorts of things. I don't know. It does look pretty good, though, I must admit. Again, on this one, I use dowels on these miters. Again, not really for any sort of strength necessarily that they add, but more because they serve almost as an extra pair of hands when I'm trying to glue up a miter like this. These are too big and too heavy to use the tape trick with. It's not a small enough box for that. So the dowels really help me keep everything together while I'm hammering it in place and getting the clamps on. I'm using these undermount drawer slides that I got from Rockler. They're a little cheaper than the Bloom slides. I'd never used these before. They were really easy to install, and I was happy with them. They worked really well, super easy. I'll use them again for sure. Wrong way, dummy. There we go. So I wanted to do my own drawer pulls, and I decided to do them out of this contrasting wood. I have this, I think it's a 1 inch or 3/4 of an inch, I forget, dowel of walnut that I had. And I had an idea, since I don't have a lathe, I can't turn these exactly. I had an idea on how I might be able to sort of shape some very simple drawer pulls. So first thing I'm doing is I set my blade height so that I could just trim away a little end sort of shank on that was exactly 1/2 inch. And the idea for me was, as you can see here, there's that end that I cut off on the table saw. As you can see here, my idea is to chuck it up in my router table. And the reason I did this is because doing it in a drill, the drill just doesn't spin with enough RPMs to do what I'm going to try here. So I thought if I could just create a 1/2 inch shank that'll fit in my router table, the router certainly spins fast enough, and then I can just basically use rough sandpaper to shape this thing. And it was an idea. I thought I would try it, and surprisingly, it worked. And it worked actually quite well. It was pretty effective. I had to keep moving the sandpaper around and using a different part because it would heat up so fast that it would just melt right through the sandpaper if I kept it in one space or one spot too long. So that's why you see me constantly moving the sandpaper around. Once I had the shape done, then I could put it in my drill, and then just go through the various grits to sand this thing smooth. But I was pretty happy with the end result. You'll see how they turned out here in just a moment. I taped off the ends because I'm going to apply glue to those, but just using simple tongue oil here to wipe onto these things. Not bad though. I was pretty happy with how they turned out, and I think they look really good against the white oak of the drawer fronts, which you'll see in the final product. So here I'm applying finish to these drawer fronts, and you'll notice it's pretty white. I'm actually using the Rubio Monocoat's cotton white finish. One of the reasons why I wanted to build this desk out of white oak is I wanted to experiment with these different pigmented finishes from Rubio, and I was I must say a little bit concerned when I first wiped it on there because it goes on really white. Like it almost looks like paint going on, and I was worried that it wouldn't come out with the final result that I wanted. And what I really wanted was to maintain that white appearance of white oak. I didn't want it to yellow or amber, which a lot of other hard wax oils and other finishes do with oak. But once you wipe off the cotton white, it actually, what you're left with, I was really pleased. You know, it's definitely has a fair amount of pigment to it, but it's not completely whitewashed. So overall, I was really pleased with it. And there you just saw those drawer pulls go in. I really like that contrast that they provided. After a bit of sanding, finally ready to put finish on the desk itself. So again, of course, the cotton white from Rubio Monocoat. And here's a great shot of what I was talking about. After you let the finish sit on there for a few minutes, just take paper towels and wipe it off, just like you do with every other Rubio Monocoat product, but you can really see that transformation in what you're left with. I really liked it. I liked the way it turned out on this white oak. It was more or less exactly what I was hoping for, so always like it when it turns out that way and works that way. And with that, now all that's left is a few beauty shots. There's the final product. It was a fun build. Again, thank you to Ishitani Furniture for inspiring me on this one. It was a lot of fun to build. Really enjoyed it. Happy with the way it came out. And hope you guys enjoy it as well. And until the next video, thanks.